So I got about 15 minutes to kind of take you through where the thinking is today on the topic of social business. We're challenges organizations because social media is not necessarily designed for the business world, yet it's how people communicate today. We'll look at the data here shortly and see that social media now is the dominant form of communication on the planet. Email is legacy technology, not in our businesses. I'd like to thank Cerebra for having me come out and talk, particularly Mike Stopforth. These slides will be available. If you want to contact me, give me your card. I can mail them to you, but the video will be available online as well. Everything I'm talking about here today is our latest research, latest thinking. It's a global perspective, so it should be useful for you here in South Africa and beyond to help your organizations shift their thinking, shift their technology, shift the way that they do business, because this does appear to be the way that the future, the very near future of how our organizations will run. So many of you know me. I have a column on ZDNet and Information Week, both, which is how a lot of people know who I am. But I spend most of my time working with large companies who are grappling with us, saying, well, our customers have moved. 1.5 billion people in the developed world have moved and shifted channels. How do we get our businesses there? And what do we do with them when we get there? What does that actually look like? And so even though we've got to create social customer care accounts on Twitter and Facebook pages, what is the actual transformation? What does the bigger picture look like? What are we aiming for? And that's what I'm hoping to take you through this morning with examples, talking about what leading organizations are actually doing. You can find most of the artwork and again, almost everything I'm talking about today you can find on my various blogs and books. There's a lot to this now. And what's so ironic is that social is really nothing new, right? It is the fundamental human condition. It's what sets us apart. It's our defining human legacy, is the ability for us to come together and work together. And we've been social for as long as there have been people. And so there's really technically nothing new about the social media revolution, right? But we've applied technology to make it very easy for us to now collapse time and space in a way that we never could before. You can now collaborate and communicate with anyone, anywhere in the world. I mean, we've done this for over 100 years now, right? We had the whole Industrial Revolution and the information age now make it possible for us to reach out to anybody. But it really wasn't until the internet arrived that made it possible, basically collapse the cost so that any one of us could reach every one of us if we wanted to, right? If all of us wanted to receive that information. And that's really the thing that's amazing about the whole social media revolution, in that it is very frictionless and it's essentially free. We all have these global platforms for self-expression, that individually we have as loud a voice as all of our businesses, and the marketing budgets don't matter so much when anyone can get the word out. Now, we've known about this, right? We've felt this. Social media teams are fully aware of this, but our businesses are still trying to deal with the fact that there are now 5 billion channels on the world. And so the challenge we have is that technology is increasing. Is changing faster than it ever has before. So this is a graph that I often bring up to show that how organizations in the very near future have a major challenge. On the left here we have a graph of the pace of technology change. It's increasing exponentially, right, and only getting faster. It's amazing to me when I look at mobile devices, for example, the App Store. Each one for Android and iOS have now over 1 million applications. And those are all created literally, the majority of them were created in the last 3 years alone. And this is the whole consumerization of technology and communication. The graph on the right, though, is what we have to be concerned about, and that's the life expectancy of the S&P 500 company is dropping dramatically, right? 75 years in 1940, and recently it was measured about 15 years and dropping quickly. And one of the big causes of that is the inability to ride that curve, right? Is to adopt technology fast enough, right? So if the entire world moves very quickly, in the last 3 years, 1.5 billion people have changed their communication habits, but our organizations largely haven't. Now, those old channels still work well enough that it's not threatening our organizations yet. But you'll see in the workshop this afternoon, we're now tracking a large sector of the economy, what Jeremiah Ouyang at Altimeter is calling the collaborative economy. Right? It's $30 billion right now, and in 3 years it'll be $200 billion. And it's fundamentally social businesses, organizations that are saying, well, we're not going to be able to transform fast enough. Let's build them up from the ground up. Things like Airbnb, right? The global hotel sharing service. It's amazing what we're seeing out there. So we've been on this progression of change for a while now, right? Blogs back in 2003. That was the very first inkling that the internet was going to be used in a very different way instead of just a publishing platform. And that morphed into the Web 2.0. It says it's going to be everything. All of our applications are going to be about sharing and connecting and communicating. And we began to actually use the term social media in 2005. And then we said, hey, but this is also happening to our businesses too. It's not really wasn't designed for them in mind, but we're doing it. Enterprise 2.0 story. Social business was coined in 2008. Our organization did that 2008. Some of the Dutchess group said, hey, we need a different term. Social media is a consumer phenomenon, but when we apply it to our businesses, it's kind of different. All right, we need to adapt social media to our organizations, and it's a slightly different thing. So we're going to give it a slightly different name, and social business, became part of that story. And now we're seeing customer experience is the big story, saying, hey, we have to do all the old channels and all the new as well, and they have to be, well thought out, well rationalized, well organized. How are we going to get there? And the goal of all this, of course, is to create better and more meaningful connections with each other. What are we going to do with the fact that each and every one of you and each and every one of your organizations is connected to everyone in the developing and the developed world 24 hours a day? And this is the challenge I put to people, saying that we are not thinking in those terms of the fact that right now you're connected to everyone else on the planet. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to enable? What scenarios does that enable? We're not taking advantage of the fact. In fact, we design our business processes and say, oh yeah, we can communicate with folks, but that isn't intrinsic to the way that we operate. Except now we do have some examples of leading organizations. I'm going to tell you some good case studies this morning that show that some organizations are realizing that and are actually starting to take advantage of it. So this is what I say is that really this is the time of greatest opportunity, but it's also the time of greatest challenges, because this is such a different way of operating. So if we could really isolate the change that's happening today, what transformation is actually taking place in that, in the classic industrial age business model, transactions, right, selling things, making widgets, and then giving them to the market, getting them to the marketplace, that was what we did. But really, we look at now the way that we do business is that our products are really a window into services and a window into a long-term relationship that we want to have with our customers. And if we have compelling products and services, our customers want to be connected to us all of the time. And how do we do that? How do we make that scale? This is one of the things we're going to talk about this morning, in that our organizations, no matter how big they are, they're just a small entity compared to the huge community of our customers and our potential customers. So we see that this is a graph of data that shows the adoption rate in the consumer world, the top two lines showing consumer social networks and email. And that I find that most people still are not aware that in the middle of July 2009 or so, social networking became the #1 way that people communicated globally. And this isn't survey data. This is hard data from the internet backbone, from ComScore and a bunch of other sources. And we now see that email is in steady decline. In fact, I've got the latest data, and we're going to update this chart shortly. It shows that it's in sharp decline everywhere except the business world. And we look at the yellow line, that's the chart of how organizations are adapting to this as well. So we see this, that across all of these channels, mass media, telephone, email, there's this large shift to social networks, customer communities, even things like our supply chain. We'll talk about some of those stories as well. If you look at the very latest data, this is Gartner's information from earlier this year, talking about the priorities of our businesses. Again, this is a global view. The top 10 business priorities on the left: increasing enterprise growth, delivering operational results, and for the first time, reducing costs has dropped down to #3. Now, if we look at technology priorities, if you line those up, those are on the right, we see analytics and business intelligence has moved to #1, clearly. Mobile, if I talk to organizations right now, they have most companies, large companies that I talk with have a mobile-first strategy. If they're doing anything, they're talking about how do I deliver this on mobile devices first. Cloud and then collaboration technology, which is another word for social. All aimed at, again, at those top three objectives. How do I grow my business? How do I make it? How do I deliver results from an operational perspective? And how do I do it less cheaply? More cheaply, with less cost. So we still see that most companies are still doing what used to work. We're seeing diminishing returns. I still see companies still doing direct mail, companies doing advertising on TV and radio. All those old channels still work because they're not entirely sure what to do with these new channels. And we do see that when we see very effective social media solutions, they look quite different than anything we used to do with traditional technology or traditional digital approaches. And we spend an enormous amount trying to achieve this move from transactions to this new relationship-based model, engagement with the marketplace. $600 billion a year is what we're spending globally to engage better with our customers, to engage better with the marketplace, in some way to drive outcomes, right? To drive, eventually, we hope, some transactions. Of course, we still have businesses and they still have to sell things. But what we really want to do is, as long as we capture the relationship, anything is possible. We saw that the internet startup community has taught us that, if anything, and that if you have the relationship with the marketplace, anything is possible. But if you only have something to sell them but no relationship, you have nothing. You can't achieve anything anymore. And this is where this number comes from. The $600 billion is what we invest in all forms of digital and non-digital engagement globally, trying to create that better connection. And this is what we now look at social media, saying, well, what does that look like? How does that better connection? How do we quantify it? How does it shape up? And hopefully, I will show you what the cutting edge of that picture looks like. So the premise is, because of this large global channel change, right? That 1.5 billion people that have moved in the last 3 years, that we can create that engagement and we can do it at scale. This is the phrase we're now seeing used more and more, is that social, because it's frictionless, because it's essentially free, is the ideal platform to engage at scale. But there are, as it turns out, some challenges doing this. And I still see that there's that a lot of people are asking for, what is the cost of not doing it? And in the book we have two case studies. This is one of them. This is Toyota. Back in 2010, they had their sudden accelerator crisis, right? So they were, at the time, this chart shows, this is a chart of their reputation. They had the greatest reputation of any automobile manufacturer in the world. And then the sudden accelerator crisis took place. And what they did is what any good company, what all of your organizations would do, is they wanted to get the word out, saying it was okay. And here's what we know. And they did this on TV, and they did this in press releases. They did it everywhere but social media. But that's not where their customers were talking about the problem. Millions of them had gotten onto social media and were demanding information and asking questions. This is one of the largest purchases and investments their families had, and now this looked to be very dangerous, right? Potentially lethal. They demanded information. And virtually overnight, within a week or so, their reputation collapsed, as you can see in this chart, and became the worst in the entire industry. It went from being one of the most storied companies in the automobile industry to having the worst reputation in the industry overnight, simply because they didn't engage with their customers where they were. And it wasn't until, where we see in this chart here with the arrows pointing, that the president of North America, Toyota, got onto social media himself personally and just started answering questions. Eventually enlisting several hundred Toyota executives to get on the channels and actually talk to their customers and get the information in the venues that they were actually discussing it. And their reputation came back a little bit. You can see that it steadily, at that point, began to recover. But it never recovered completely. The damage to their reputation was permanent because they didn't engage at scale where their customers were. And we saw the same thing with British Petroleum, and they've been following the Applebee's scandal earlier this year. United States, same thing. This is what happens when we don't. We have to be in these channels. So let me tell you one of my absolute favorite case studies, showing what happens when we engage at scale. We rethink what's possible and how we connect with our marketplace. So Intuit as a company may not be very familiar with here in South Africa. It's a large tax preparation service. They use software to do everything from managing your checkbook to filing your taxes. They are a very large company. And at the time that this story took place, they were number 2 in their industry. A company called H&R Block was number 1 and prepared most tax returns in the United States. They were a distant number 2. H&R Block used people, which don't scale very well, to file tax returns. Intuit used software. Said, hey, buy our software. We'll ask you some questions, and we'll fill it out and submit it. Now, taxes, I don't know how they are here, but in the United States, they can be very complicated. So the challenge is people would use the product. They would buy it. They'd pay their $80. They would use it, and they would get stuck on something. And they would try and call Intuit for help and get advice. And the problem, of course, is that they're using software. They have tens of millions of customers, and those taxes are all due on the same date. So they had a rather extreme problem that still all of your organizations have, in that everyone used their product about 2 or 3 weeks before that date. Tens of millions of people using the product. So guess what happened when they called to get help? They were stuck. Nobody could answer the phone. They actually had done an internal study saying they would have to hire 50,000 people for those 2 or 3 weeks to be able to answer the phone if somebody called. So they tried everything to solve that problem because it caused a high level of abandonment. People bought the product, and then when they got stuck, they went to H&R Block anyway and spent the $400 it cost on average to prepare it there. So this is a classic business problem, saying, hey, social is a better and far cheaper way to engage at scale. How can we make this work for us? And so they tried everything, right? They only eventually, one of their many experiments was to create a customer community, right? Why aren't we told to do that? So they create a customer community, and they can answer each other's problems. And they bought Jive, and they created that, and it worked. In fact, it was the only thing that worked, but only just a little bit. It didn't revolutionize their business. And this is one of the lessons that we've learned. When we look at the companies that are knocking it out of the park, we'll talk about how well they performed when they made their customer care processes fundamentally social. But what they did was they said, all right, well, that worked a little bit. That was the only thing that has ever worked. What happens if we turn up the volume? We put a customer community tab off in the corner of our product, but what if we make our product fundamentally social? And that's what they did. They created something called Live Community. And they put it on every single page of their product on the right-hand side. Now, and if I talk to an audience in the United States, everyone goes, hey, I've used that. Yeah, virtually everyone who has prepared taxes in the United States has used Live Community, right? Tens upon tens of millions of people, because it's right there. And the magic is this, is that you go through your 1040 tax form, you're filling it out, and you get stuck, and the community is right there. You can ask a question. And anybody on the Intuit side can answer the question. But what's much more likely is that another customer who's also on that page will ask the question, answer it as well. And in fact, I have a sample of it here. So this is TurboTax Vincent, and he answers a lot of questions. In fact, it says questions answered 13,861. And they have a typical question here. How do you calculate cost basis? And TurboTax Vincent said, cost basis is generally the dollar amount, to so on and so forth. Right now, over 90% of Intuit's customers answer those questions from other customers, right? It's a very scalable resource. What's the biggest resource your company has to do amazing things, to market better, to support better, to create better products? It's your customers. Have you gathered them together in a community? Well, most companies have not yet. In fact, I try and track all the Fortune 500 to say, have they created a community and who's the leader in their industry and so on. But the point here is that a year after launching Live Community in 2008, Intuit became the #1 tax preparer in the United States for the first time. They destroyed their competition. They dramatically cut product abandonment and increased the customer satisfaction scores. They moved in the #1 place, and they're still there, even today. We actually have an H&R Block case study. We'll see if we get to that before the end of the session. They're trying to fight back, but they still don't know what happened to them. This is something that each and every one of your companies can do too. And they said what Intuit did, which is said, well, if this social stuff works, and we sprinkle it around the edges and do a little bit, we get results. But if we really want to knock it out of the park, we have to make our business process fundamentally social. And of course, it's great marketing too, by the way. A great customer care is a fantastic way to market. It's just one case study. There are many others like it, though. We're now starting to see organizations saying, how do I become a social business? Intuit's customers now provide the majority of the customer care. They say, hey, the advice is as you find it, but they have scoring and ranking mechanisms, right? So you can report it, you can do the thumbs up, thumbs down, 2 people sent thanks. They find that inaccurate answers quickly get removed from that page, and they do a lot of optimization. So again, Live Community, great example of a cutting-edge social business really producing results. And we see this. So I'll show you some data here showing that we see that social business techniques like this can be used to drive business outcomes in scale for sales, customer retention, customer care, product development, and in particular, crisis resolution. We'll talk about advocates here in a momentarily. So one of the things I find that's very interesting is I ask companies when I meet them now is do you have your social data? Do you have the conversations that have involved your business? You know, it's all still out there, right? Virtually every conversation that has ever happened about your brand and your company is out there. It's a mountain of invaluable information about your customers that are happy, ones that are not. It's everything you need to market. It's everything you need to provide customer care. We'll talk about how, when I say everything, I'm not kidding. I'll give you a case study talking about that momentarily. But I still see most companies don't have that information. It's all out there, but they're not making any heads or tails of it. And this is the magic, you know, is social, is public conversation. Social media, that's the big difference. It is an open conversation that all of us can see. It's open for all of us to engage with, and we can collect that data and we can begin doing stuff with that. That's really important. So we see that scale and this open data in a highly interactive medium creates wonderful business opportunities, right, for insight and then engagement with that marketplace, right? In the top social networks and in the hundreds of customer communities that are out there. We see that most brands have daily mentions, many daily mentions, that they're completely unaware of. So before we get into a little bit more data, let's talk about examples. I find that things like the Intuit story and Toyota and others are very illustrative of our challenges. And we see that it's a long road to become a social business. Right? It took Intuit many experiments to finally conclude that Live Community was the right approach, that they should turn the volume up all the way. They should make that fundamentally social. Alcatel-Lucent, a large global telecommunications provider. They do a lot of other things as well. It took them 3 years to really become a social business. They started way back in 2008 with giving their CEO a blog with no filter. Right? Anyone in the company could talk to the CEO through his blog. They then rolled out microblogging inside the company, right? And they experimented and they realized that, hey, these tools are kind of primitive. We need something much more enterprise class. And in 2009 and 2010, they launched Engage. And they now have 60,000 profiles, 4,000 employee-created groups. And it's a good story of becoming social on the inside. And that's one of the things I'm going to go back and forth in my talk this morning about is telling you stories about companies being social on the inside and companies being social on the outside. And we're going to find that however, the best social businesses are the ones that are social in both places, and the data is starting to confirm that. This is another social business adoption story, Cemex. By the way, all these are written up in detail on ZDNet. You can just type in Cemex, and ZDNet will come up on Google. They had the same thing, same challenge I see so many companies have. I was talking to Mike Stopforth on the way in yesterday from the airport. We see all these global companies who have their fastest growing regions are in these far-flung places like Africa, places like Asia, where all their growth is. And they have these home offices that are increasingly disconnected to where all the action is, right? They're not growing where they originally built their businesses. They're growing overseas, but they don't know who these people are. Cemex is the world's largest cement manufacturer. All their big factories have moved overseas, and they're not connected very well to those people. They don't know who they are, and they're worried about losing their global culture. This is one of the challenges that we see here with globalization, is that a lot of big companies are actually really about 12 to 20 medium-sized companies that don't talk. They don't get the advantages of being a global company, and this is what Cemex was concerned about. And they're one of the fastest stories I've seen. You know, Alcatel-Lucent took 3 years. We're going to look at BASF in a second. Cemex did this in 1 year. 20,000 employees in a very patriarchal culture. They're actually based in Mexico. The average age of their worker is 50-something, right? So these are not people who spend a lot of time on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. but they want them to be connected to where all the action is happening overseas. And so they rolled out a social network that both connected everyone together inside as well as connected to Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn on the outside. Rich user profiles, wikis, activity streams, social bookmarking. They got 98% adoption in 1 year. They did very smart things though. They had a global collaborative literacy program. They had change management where they actually required that managers change their business processes to include social tools, saying you're going to do, the work has to be done using social tools. You're going to connect with people outside the company, preferentially with social media first, and email only if that's the best way to do it. They created a training and communications program, posters around the world saying, hey, we're going to be a social networking-driven company. And the smartest thing they did is they rolled it out. They had an executive leadership program that rolled out the social networking capabilities to their managers 2 months ahead of time before the rest of the company so they could learn it, they could lead by example, they could actually think about how they wanted to change what they're doing, and then they could train their employees on how they would like it to be used. Very effective program. I keep getting updates from that team. They're very happy with how that went. 1 year from start to finish. This was 2011, so it's a fairly recent story. Ended 2011, just over a year old. BASF is a much bigger company. There's a large difference between getting 20,000 employees on and 100,000 employees. BASF is the famous chemical company based in Germany. I used to talk a lot in Germany because they wanted to know what the crazy Americans were doing with social media, but it was never going to happen in Germany. Right? It was very bureaucratic, too hierarchical. And now Germany is the #2 place in the world where social business is happening. No coincidence, they're also #2 economy, #3 economy now, actually. But it took them many years to lay the groundwork. But it's very important that we learn from what worked for them. They now have social networking rolled out across the company. They do all their project management of these multi-billion-dollar projects, all using social tools. They're now rolling it so it's all customer-facing. They're going to be engaging with all their customers using social networking this year. It's in the process of being rolled out. But what's really important about this story is what they did is they first came up with the idea back in 2007. The first thing they did is they acquired a board-level sponsor. Say, here's what you want to do. It's going to be a big change. It'll be a big change in mindset, right? Big change in culture, big change in process. But they got somebody very high up to buy into this. That was very important to create the air cover. And then they said, well, we also need the most important people, the biggest thinkers in our company involved as well. So they created an interdisciplinary team engagement program where they said, hey, here's what we're going to do, but it's not going to work unless the most respected people in the company are involved. And then they said it's going to impact existing technology. One of the things I find is that most companies don't look at their marketing, their existing marketing efforts, the customer care efforts, and go, how is it going to affect what we're already doing today? But BASF did. They reached out to their intranet team and to their document management teams and all these other teams and said, what we're going to do is going to affect you. We're going to take your internal market share. So we want you to be part of this, because if you're not part of this, it's not going to work. You're going to fight us every step of the way. In fact, this is one of the challenges that almost everything you're going to do with social is going to threaten somebody who is already doing this another way. And you have to engage and involve them. But they did. They reached out to them. And then they did a big pilot throughout 2009 involving the most respected people in the company, involving executives, and getting their existing solutions aligned together. And it was successful. And we see the red line that's their adoption data. They have now a half the company on board. And that's considered a success, by the way. You don't need everybody. You have a lot of workers who might be working in the field who have jobs to do that don't involve social, for example. So a great example. Now, moving outside the company, one of my very favorite stories is Burberry, the global fashion brand. Angela Ahrendts, that's her on the stage with Mark Benioff. That's a picture of the napkin she drew. She became a CEO at the beginning of 2010, and she looked at this very respected global fashion brand and said, it's a mess. Our systems don't talk to each other. We don't talk to our customers. We're not engaging with them. Right? They have 10 million Facebook fans. They have 15,000 partners who are also heavily social, and they have 6,600 workers. And no one knew when products were going to hit the store. People would complain on social. No one would answer them. They obviously, to anybody who bothered to take a look, were a mess in the engagement arena. And of course, a fashion brand is all about how you how you connect with your constituents, right? Your loyal fans, people who love your brand, your products, and your services. So she looked around at everything. She said, all right, so what's the best way? What's considered the best way right now to reorganize your company to engage with all of these groups? Our workers, right? Our supply chain, our stores and fashion designers, and our customers. What's the best way? And everyone came back to her and said, well, it should be a social business, of course. So she did. It became the #1 initiative in the company, right, through 2010 and now through 2011, is to become a social business. She threw away her website. So we need a fundamentally social way to connect. And we actually need to talk to the stores. We need information from wherever it is inside of our company to get to wherever it needs to be outside the company. And it's going to do that on social channels. And what was great is after a year of doing this, that was their major global initiative, 29% higher global profit margin. Wall Street analysts credited the social media strategy as the primary reason. Now, of course, they're going through some challenges that are not related to social right now. But what's great is that this is a story that you can take back to your organization and say, people are doing this. It was great that it was a CEO-led effort. That makes things happen really fast. They're still in the process of doing this. It's going to take them years to get all the way there. But it had almost immediate impact, right? A couple quarters later, you can get those investment returns back. So, but the problem is most organizations aren't doing this. They're not laying the proper foundation. And even when they are, we're beginning to see, as organizations really start to operationalize for social, we're starting to see organizations run into a new problem. And I hate to say it this way, but the approach that most organizations, most enterprises have with social doesn't work. And that's been one of the hard lessons we've had after 5 years of doing this over and over and over again. And what I mean by this is that we thought that if we just had enough resources, we had a big enough social media team that we could make social perform to its highest level. That's what we thought. If you do any level of adoption of social, you're going to get some benefits, right? It's an easier way to communicate. It's very inexpensive compared to a lot of older ways. Look what Intuit, by the way, their customer care costs plummeted. Right? When the customers are providing most of their customer care for free, you can imagine that was quite inexpensive. So the hard lesson, the brutal lesson in the last 5 years is that bigger staffs fail. You need to have an appropriately sized staff, but there's no way you can staff into it. The current data shows that the average large company has a staff of 11 people across their company, right? Community managers and social strategists and social brand manager and social customer care. I was talking to the CIO of Time Warner a few months ago, and he said, the social stuff's expensive. I got 350 social customer service representatives. And I go, well, yeah, but how many people do you have answering the phone? I bet it's tens of thousands. So they're just not looking at it with the right lens. But it's still not going to work. I mean, the challenge really is this, right? Is that we're greatly outnumbered by our social constituents. No matter how big your staff is, or even if you mobilize everyone in your company to be social, it's too big to reach the full promise, to really get the full benefits of social. How are you going to staff into it? You can't. It doesn't work. You know, not when you have that world to engage with, and this is your social media effort, typically, right? We're now realizing that we're outmatched. And so now we've seen companies really struggling trying to figure out, how do we solve this problem? If we can't staff into it, what are we going to use to tackle the issue? We have millions of customers. They want to engage with us, which is what we want. They want to have a much better relationship with us, which is what we want too. But we can't do this with these small teams that we have. And so this has led for the last couple of years for organizations looking for ways to deal with this problem. How do we engage at scale? We can engage. That's not the problem. We just can't do it in scale. Scott Money, head of social for Ford, I talked to him regularly. He was kind enough to endorse my book. I just ran into him at a conference a few weeks ago. And he has this great data. They cannot engage with their customers adequately enough. It takes them up to a day to respond to them. Really, if you want to turn a social conversation into a business opportunity, you got 5 to 10 minutes, according to data from Brian Solis. He's done a lot of thinking about this. You have as long as a day, but the chances of you turning that into an immediate business opportunity, converting that person to a customer, you really only have 5 or 10 minutes. And this is the challenge. If somebody is talking to your company over social, you have to do something about it. How do we engage in scale? And so the question that we've been going around asking now is, now we get the mismatch problem, right? This technology really is wonderful. We now talk to everybody, but the problem is they actually want to talk to us now. And we'll look at some other case studies to show what's possible. And so we've been looking around for another approach. And what we're seeing, this is where the rise of the whole discussion around social advocacy. To engage at scale, we have to mobilize our full spectrum of constituents, right, to extend our reach. That starts with our employees. Everyone is in the social media department. Now, in practice, you'll find that many people are not effective in social media in your organization, but everybody who can be effective and is interested in doing so, it's a fantastic resource that you have the most direct control of. It takes a little bit of training. Dell, the global computer company, has over 10,000 certified social media representatives. These are just people who have a day job inside the company, but might spend 10 or 20 minutes a day talking with people, and they actually have this fantastic monitoring program that runs all day long and in real time involves the right constituent inside the company. They had a laptop overheating problem last year, and they saw a lot of people suddenly talking about it as soon as the units actually hit the marketplace, and they jumped right on it, and they got the engineer who's in charge of the cooling system to immediately start talking to people, headed off a potentially very big, very embarrassing problem. You never heard about it because they dealt with it right away. Yeah, and they have some great case studies you can find online as well. They are probably one of the leaders in using this model of using your employees to engage at scale. Not just your social media team, but everyone who is able to do it effectively within the organization. So that's step one. The next great resource we see for engaging at scale is enlisting your partners. So these are the people you do business with. These are your suppliers. These are people who have a vested interest in your success. And what's really nice is that they have a vested interest in your success, but you don't pay them. And we find that this is an area that's not very well developed. There's only a few really good case studies of this, but they do exist, in financial services in particular, where partners can be enlisted and choreographed. Your community managers can engage them and get them involved. Again, to address the problem of you have millions of customers who want to talk with you, who want to have a relationship with you, and you need the resources, you need the raw material to be able to actually engage with them. And having advocates and your business partners can do that. And then everyone else, right? Everyone else who wants to be an advocate can be enlisted, right? So this is the Intuit example. I didn't have time to go into why TurboTax Vincent answered 13,000 questions. We'll cover that in the workshop this afternoon. But there's a lot of motivation, as it turns out. There's a lot of capacity, a lot of advocate capacity. We're now seeing advocate programs. I have a great blog post that covers the top advocate programs in the world right now. There are large and very formal and very effective advocate programs by a small set of leading companies. This is the problem with technology, right? It separates the leaders and the laggards. Is that there are now companies that are performing at a very high level in social, but the rest of us are still trying to figure out how to do it. So the engagement at scale problem, we're now starting to see evidence, like Intuit solved that problem, engaging at scale, on the customer care side. We see Gatorade rejuvenated that branding. I didn't bother to put the slide because it's in every social media presentation that's out right now. They took a dying brand, they were going to box it and put it away and shut it down. It's amazing what they were able to do with it. So part of the challenge, the big shift with advocacy and why that they're so important to start focusing on, is not just the scale problem. This is the trust barometer from Edelman. They released earlier at the beginning of this year from 2012 data, and it shows the biggest shift in consumer trust in history. Right, so that right now, a person like yourself, a plus 22% in gain, is the greatest increase since 2004, is now one of the most trusted sources of information. And we see a great decline, active decline in traditional sources of information. In fact, only recognized technical experts and academics rate higher than people like yourself. And this is one of the other reasons. So even if engagement at scale is not a problem you're currently experiencing, what we are seeing is that traditional sources of information, traditional sources of marketing are declining dramatically. And where the trust is actually rising is in people that are likely to be advocates for our brands. Yet another reason why we should be cultivating them. And it turns out that our constituents are actually better at engagement anyway, right? We used to work with Sirius Radio, they, back in the day, they didn't create a customer community, so their customers loved their product so much they went off and created XM fans, 250,000 strong customer community created without involvement from the brand. And they realized that those people spent all day with their products, all day, every day, using their satellite radio services. And they actually knew them much better than their technical support representatives, even the tier 2 and 3 experts inside the call center didn't know as much as their customers did. And what they actually made an arrangement saying, hey, we didn't create a community. We understand that, and we're really sorry about that. But we'd like to send you new members, and if you could help answer their questions, we'd appreciate that. And it turned out that if they couldn't solve a problem right away for that customer, they would send them to the community, and the community would take care of them, usually answering and solving the problem within 10 minutes or so. So it was a great way to cut costs. Cut customer care costs by a third, and double their customer satisfaction scores, all by using that community, because their constituents were better at engagement than the company. Just another typical example. And we see that this is the effect of social engagement. This is the eMarketer data. I love their charts. And it shows that improved marketing and sales effectiveness, increased market share, those are the things that senior executives report most getting from the social engagement that they have with their company. Again, survey data, so I don't necessarily trust it. So we're going to look at some better data here in a second. And here it is. So 5 years after really doing social for a lot, in many different industries, we're starting to get a good picture about what works and what doesn't. And McKinsey, the famous consulting company, every 5 years they've been surveying thousands of their large customers saying, hey, using social, how's that working for you? What results are you seeing? And for the first time last year, they saw an important new pattern in the data. And this is going to be really important. One of the reasons I keep switching between inside stories and outside stories. And so this data shows, for the first time last year, showed a brand new pattern. And it's worth walking through this because it represents data from thousands of top companies. They surveyed 2,413 companies that are only developing social media inside or outside. And they're getting 1 to 2% incremental improvements across the company. And that's pretty good. If you're a $100 million company, you're getting $1 or $2 million improvement to your bottom line. That's pretty good. But most companies are there. A few hundred companies have internally networked, 224, and they're seeing 18% overall bottom line improvements inside processes within their company. 365 have finished externally networking, right? Having a fully mature and capable engagement capability outside, and they're seeing double-digit gains on the outside, which is what you'd expect, and some inside too, right? 13 and 11%. Those are significant gains. But the data that they saw for the very first time they had not seen before is that a few companies had done both, finally. Very few companies have both internally socially networked and externally socially networked. They tracked 100 companies, and those companies reported outsized benefits, dramatically higher, not just additive of the other ones. And this is one, and we're talking, look, 26%, 21%, 24% bottom line gains. Again, I encourage you to look at this data. And it shows that a few companies have become true social businesses. Right? Their employees can connect with their customers. They're not looking at it. They're not isolating the way that they work. Because what I see now, I go into large companies, and I see they have a social networking initiative inside, and they have a marketing effort on the outside, and they have two teams, two platforms, two strategies, two efforts, and then they start growing closer and closer together, and then they finally realize that they both have to work. For employees to talk to customers, customers to talk to employees, they need a consistent way of working, but they've just done social business twice. But a few companies haven't, and they're getting big benefits. So fully social organizations, the big lesson of the last 5 years is that fully social organizations get outsized benefits. Those numbers are large enough to have significant competitive concerns. Right? This is one of the reasons I cite the Intuit example. Here's a company that in 1 year of building a real social business capability, they became #1 in their industry. Not everybody can do that, but the organizations that are prepared to do it will get the benefits. But the problem is, and as soon as I saw this data, I go, wow, I want to double check that. So I went to our Social Business Council. It's the largest online community of large companies. You have to have 10,000 or more employees to be a member, and you have to be the person in charge of social business transformation in your company. We got 300 of the global 2,000, well, actually 350 now. I just got the new data. of the Global 2000 in there. And we collect their data. And I asked them, I said, so are you connecting? Are you doing social twice? Or are you trying to be a really fully social business? 96% of them were not connecting their internal and external social business efforts. That's the same as this data, by the way. Most organizations are either developing, seeing the 1 or 2%, or they're just doing it inside or outside. And they're going to get, if they have to go against the companies, if you have somebody in your industry that's doing it over here, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. But I see most, as we see, most global organizations, 96% of them. By the way, I sampled in 4% math who they were, and they're companies that are performing extremely well in the market, right? No, that's this correlation, that's not causation, but it's very interesting. So the lesson here, we've seen some now major challenges. We understand social a lot better. Engagement at scale is one of our now biggest challenges. We now seem to have solutions. We're starting to see companies solving the engagement at scale problem. The next problem that we're going to have is that we're treating social as a separate thing, right? It's not how we do work. And we're creating these artificial islands inside of our companies, and we're paying the price for it. We're not seeing the benefits, and we're seeing the organizations that don't create those silos, that do connect everyone, that connect their whole ecosystem, right, into one. It's all part of the same continuum. What if you couldn't email somebody, right? That's something, would you continue to use email, or would you use another way of connecting? We've put up these strange artificial barriers for some reason, often good reasons, by the way. But we find that the benefits seem to come from having one unified ecosystem, one social business, one way of doing it. And we see that it's also difficult. It is a challenge to get there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you one story, because the stories are very good. Data-driven engagement is another way of solving the engagement at scale problem. This is a new story. T-Mobile, a very big phone carrier in Europe and in the U.S., and this is the U.S. story. They were getting their posterior handed to them in the marketplace in the United States anyway, right? AT&T and Verizon were crushing them. They didn't have the iPhone, for example, right? They do now, but they didn't when the story took place last year. And they realized that their customers, we see this all the time. People complain. When they complain, they tend to use social media, right? When they love something and it goes really well, they tend to mention it much less, right? Negative sentiment seems to be broadcast much more often. And they would see it. They say, hey, I hate this service. I'm going to leave it as soon as a chance I get. And then they would announce that they had left, and they have their new iPhone, and they have a picture from a competitor. And they saw this over and over and over again by the millions. And they said, hey, it's the same pattern, right? And things like tweets are often geolocated. What if we could correlate that whole progression and correlate it with our CRM database and find out who those people are and create a real-time marketing campaign and reach out to them and convince them to stay? And so they did that, and it was enormously successful, right? So they took a set of customer data they already had. They looked at the universe of conversation, right? Like I said, most companies don't even have their social data, right? It's a big problem, but they did. They went and collected it. They correlated it. And then when people started to enter the progression, right, started complaining about the service, they'd reach out and go, hey, I see you want to leave. We want you to stay, and here's what we're willing to do. And the data is startling. This is from a case study by the Financial Times, right? This is not reported by T-Mobile, who doesn't really want anyone to know this story. Cut customer defections in half in 90 days. Now, 10% would have been impressive. We're talking half. When I said earlier that everyone is out there, this is the data we're starting to see. There was enough people complaining out there, they were actually able to use this program, correlating social conversation, engaging with those customers, reaching out and engaging with them in a real-time marketing campaign and getting them to stay. And this is one of the things McKinsey also reported, is that the tip-top market leaders are so comfortable they're not doing this. We see this. Intuit was number 2 and distant number 2, and they're willing to experiment. They're willing to risk. Same thing with T-Mobile. They had nothing to lose. They were going to leave the market if they couldn't solve this problem. In fact, it was so dire. So again, they had nothing to lose, and they took a big step, right? This is a serious investment, right? This is a program that cost tens of millions of dollars to implement. But it really saved them. And in a very short period of time, they got those kinds of results. So that's possible for you too. And this is one of the newer stories, right? This is not even a year old now. And we're seeing that. So So to wrap up, what does all this mean? All right, I challenge you guys. We've learned a lot, and we've also identified major challenges, but we think we know how to solve them. All right? And we see that the digitally disruptive CMO or CIO will have data supremacy. You've got to have your data. You've got to be plugged into it in real time. You've got to use it. And we see what companies that use their data, what they can achieve. You have to invest in data-driven operations. Brand marketing is going to look a lot more like other business functions. Notice that a lot of the success stories were customer care stories. But really, that's marketing. Customer experiences become centered around extended multi-channel conversations. You have to be at all the touch points now, and you have to integrate that, watch it, and engage when it matters. Right? And you can't engage in every conversation, nor should you, but you have to engage in the ones that matter. And companies have to be ready to have their advocates on tap at each touch point. Right? And that requires having advocate capital, cultivating them, and aiming them at business objectives. The whole big data story, collecting your social data in real time, and then performance managing that engagement. Are you using that data? Are you engaging in the right conversations and managing to that every day? We're starting to notice a pattern that a lot of social business efforts start decreasing in effectiveness over time because they're not watching the numbers. They reported initial success and then it fades. They're not doing performance management. So that's what we've added there. So you have to have all three to succeed. And the lesson here is, and I see this over and over again, the companies that win are willing to experiment and fail, but they're utterly committed. They're not half-hearted about social business. They put it deeply into what they do. And when that happens, then they're starting to get the outsized benefits that we know that are possible. So it's an exciting time. I don't think we have time for questions, though. We'll take.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Give Don a round of applause, please.
Thank you.